Hello and welcome into the first ever episode of the Bulls Roundtable podcast. My name is Gavin Dorsey. I'm super excited to be your host. I am the publisher of the Chicago Bulls Roundtable site. Roundtable is a new global sports network that just launched, featuring sites from all across the country, all across the globe, for football, basketball, baseball, hockey, soccer, collegiate sports. I'm the publisher for the Chicago Bulls site as well as the Northwestern Wildcats site. And so you can find all of our written coverage online, roundtable.io/sports/NBA/Bulls. We're excited to have some written content, podcasts, video coverage, polls, community sections. You can make an account, like and comment, share your thoughts on the Chicago Bulls this upcoming season, as well as the analysis, the features, the news, and more that our writers and content creators produce. And I'm super excited to help lead everyone and to help be a part of this amazing new creation and process. I am super excited to run this podcast as well. We will be doing weekly episodes, approximately roughly half an hour, with several other people covering the Bulls, members of the Bulls media, several other NBA teams previewing upcoming games, talking about the past week of games. Leading up to the season, we're going to be diving into specific players, previews. One of the things that we're going to be talking about on this episode, I'm joined by fellow Roundtable writer Michael Walton. We are going to be talking about the Josh Giddey extension. He signed a 4-year, $100 million contract extension with the Chicago Bulls after a very, very long holdout this summer. So that situation is finally resolved. I'm excited to talk about that with Michael coming up, as well as our expectations for the Bulls this season. What are reasonable expectations? What are the best and worst case scenarios? What's going to be necessary for the Bulls to achieve each of those, or, suffer each one of those? So I'm super excited now to get into our conversation with Michael. And I wanted to thank you all for taking the time to listen to the Bulls Roundtable podcast, and make sure to check us out online at roundtable.io/sports/NBA/Bulls. Without further ado, here's our conversation with Michael. Pleased to now welcome to the Bulls Roundtable podcast, Michael Walton. Michael is a writer here for us at Bulls Roundtable. How are you doing today, Michael?
Doing great, Gavin. Appreciate you for having me on. And, it's always a good day to talk Chicago Bulls basketball. So, yeah, very excited to be here. And like I said, thanks again.
Absolutely excited to have you, covering the team for us here at Roundtable throughout the entire season. Hopefully we'll be talking on this podcast a frequent amount. And kind of one of the big things that we wanted to start with on this inaugural episode of the Bulls Roundtable podcast, it has been a relatively quiet last part of the offseason. There's been a lot of 4 restricted free agents kind of stuck in that purgatory range. And the Bulls finally resolved their dispute with point guard Josh Giddey, who they acquired last year from the Oklahoma City Thunder. He was a restricted free agent, did not sign the qualifying offer. Instead, they agreed to a 4-year, $100 million contract. Michael, I asked you to grade the deal, A to F scale. How would you rate this deal, for both sides? Who do you think came out on the better side of it?
Yeah, so this deal, it upset me from the standpoint that, almost as with everything, if you're a longtime diehard Chicago Bulls fan, is that it felt like a very boring conclusion to what was kind of an exciting saga for Bulls fans. The Bulls, as far as free agency negotiations, usually either sort of give in immediately and sign a player to slightly above market value because they very much value them, or they kind of alienate them, and then you see the situation kind of sour and things go poorly. I think with Giddey, they kind of did a weird medium in between both of those extremes. I definitely think Giddey felt a little bit alienated as this went on a lot longer than he and his camp likely expected. But overall, if I had to grade a winner in the deal, I would say it's Josh Giddey. I would say the Chicago Bulls definitely didn't lose the deal, because overall for them, the most important thing, no matter what, was going to be retaining the asset. Because they didn't get anything else in the Alex Caruso trade. They did just receive Josh Giddey. So obviously losing Giddey makes that Caruso trade a disaster, on top of the fact that he was a key piece in the Oklahoma City Thunder winning the title, and you didn't extract any other assets. So letting Giddey go was simply not an option. So I think you do have to give the Bulls some credit there. But again, overall, if I'm giving like a grade just together, I would say B plus. And it's because, again, keeping Giddy is important, and the Bulls got no options on the deal, which I was surprised. I did think Josh Giddey would get a player option since the saga went on so long. I thought he would receive that, allowing him to decline his player option and then hit the open market again while still being under 30 years old and try to get that $30 million a year figure that he originally was looking for. But with no options, the Bulls have him locked in for the full terms of that 4-year deal. So very good work on them getting no options on that. But then at the same time, you have to look at this as, unequivocally a win for Josh Giddey. The Bulls' original offer was reported at, I believe, $20 million a year. And I believe the market pretty much indicated that the Brooklyn Nets were the only team with significant cap space that could maybe entertain adding Giddey. And ironically, that was a team that needed a lot of point guard help. So it seemed like they were going to come into play. When the Nets showed they had no sort of interest in Josh Giddey at all, it played perfectly into the Bulls' hands where that $20 million figure they were offering is pretty generous, even if Giddey doesn't like to hear that. So they could have sat on that number for as long as they wanted to, in my opinion. But what fans sort of discount is the human element of this. This isn't 2K. These aren't just cap sheets. These are real people. And Josh Giddey obviously was feeling a little disrespected that the Bulls didn't really want to come up from $20 million a year. So when you look at the human element, I can't blame the Bulls for upping that number a little bit, even though they had literally no reason to, besides trying to make some goodwill with the player and show, hey, we do value you. We'll give you above market value. No one else is offering you anything close to 20 million, and we're still willing to go up and give you 25 million a year. I think once Giddey and his camp saw that, you obviously have to accept because you're clearly not getting 30 and playing on the qualifying offer. That's an $11 million contract. You do get the advantage of a no trade clause, but the fact that you're losing so much in career earnings in that 1 year makes it not worth it. And so it's a win for Giddey because you look at some of those, you mentioned the other restricted free agents out there. At the time of this recording, Kuminga's situation is still not figured out in Golden State, and Cam Thomas accepted the qualifying offer in Brooklyn, which I believe only nets him $6 million this year. So again, even if he gets that big deal he's looking for, you're just hurting your earning power sort of overall when you accept that qualifying offer. So great work by Josh Giddey. Okay work by the Chicago Bulls.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think you kind of have to look at this from two sides, right? I mean, we obviously heard that Josh Giddey was looking for somewhere in the $30 million a year range. The Bulls were looking for somewhere in the $20 million a year range. But the Bulls had all of the leverage, like you mentioned. The issue with these restricted free agents is that there was basically nobody with the cap space. The Nets were reluctant even to offer Cam Thomas, who has been with that team for several years now and has been a pretty solid player on a overall awful team. They weren't even willing to offer him a long-term contract. Instead, had to give him that prove it qualifying offer. And so when you look at it that way, the fact that they settled at 25 million a year is kind of like it's a little bit of a question mark, a head scratcher from the Bulls front office because there's literally was no market for him. However, on the other side of it, you mentioned the goodwill toward your players and feeling that way. And you look at this Bulls team, who I believe is, I want to say, the third most cap space next summer. They have just $85 million committed to 2026. Still trying to kind of figure out what's going on. Also trying to, make sure that they got something back from the Alex Caruso deal. And I understand seeing this kind of a leap from Josh Giddey, you want to see it for a more extended period of time before rewarding him. It definitely feels like they bit a little bit. I know they probably could have landed more around the 22 million a year with an option, and they instead opted to give him 25 million a year. I think it's, not a terrible deal in terms of that, and especially not when you account for the other players that are making that amount of money. In terms of point guards, 20 million or 25 million a year would put Giddey as tied for the 23rd highest paid in the league. Reminder that there's only 30 teams. So if you're looking at this as a team that is not going to be, they're looking to compete for a playoff spot. Who knows if that's going to happen? They've been kind of stuck in that middle play-in range. I don't think it's a terrible deal at all. There's definitely some question marks in terms of how the decision making was made, but I think at a certain point in time, they were just kind of willing to, part with a little bit more money to make sure they had him locked up for the foreseeable future. And I think especially, you know, when you think about the fact that Kobe White and Nikola Vucevic are both going to be free agents next summer as well, in addition to a lot of other key players, I think just having one piece of the puzzle locked down is something that can give the Bulls organization a little bit of peace of mind heading into the season. So I went with a B on this deal, slightly below yours, but I also am a little less optimistic about seeing a short spurt of and a short spurt of success and saying whether that's equatable to an entire season over a long stretch. But should be really interesting over the upcoming year, how it pans out and whether he proves it's worth it or not. I think it's a bargain.
Yeah, overall, like you said, I'm really glad you mentioned that figure, Gavin, about where he's paid in terms of the point guards in the league. Because when you look at the names, I believe he's similarly paid to players like Fred VanVleet, who I believe renegotiated his contract for the Houston Rockets this offseason. Obviously, a more accomplished player, but again, a smaller guy who is getting to the downturn of his career in terms of age and, age related progression. So again, with Giddey, you're paying him similar to some of these guys who are obviously getting older and going towards the downturns of their careers. Josh Giddey's 22 years old. Even if you are the lowest of low on Josh Giddey, you can admit that 4 or 5 years from now, he could be a completely different player. So just in terms of a value play, definitely not a bad deal, even though, like I said, I think everyone can admit definitely a slight overpay if you have to define it. But in the end, I definitely don't think it's going to be a huge detriment to the Bulls, but time will tell.
Yeah, with the NFL season going on, I'm very football brained, and so $25 million a year is a lot of money, obviously. But when you look at the players comparatively that he's getting paid, I mean, Fred VanVleet's over, I think he's over a decade older than Josh Giddey, and he's making $6 million a year less than Emmanuel Quickly for the Raptors. I mean, it's
Mm.
NBA money is just different. And I understand if, people and especially Bulls fans are going to scoff at the number and say, for that guy, for a guy who, was not a plus defender last year and still has a ways to go in terms of, his scoring leap, I think it's ridiculous. And I could understand that. I could certainly understand that. But given the way that the NBA cap is expanding, given the way that players are getting paid more and more every single year, he's locked up for 4 years. You don't have to deal with an option. I think overall a good deal. And I think the interesting thing will be, as we had seen last season, just how much of a leap he took after the Zach LaVine trade and really after the All-Star break. Obviously, a very small sample size, but it's something that's intriguing to me. The Zach LaVine trade happened on February 3rd, and the All-Star break happened on the All-Star game was February 16th. So I'm going to say, generally very similar in that regard, but. So I'm gonna list off a couple stats real quick. Giddey
Yeah.
played 51 games before the All-Star break. 12.2 points. He was I'm actually just going to leave all of that out. He increased his scoring, rebounding, assisting, all of that after the All-Star break. He was also getting to the line significantly more. So in 19 games after, in the second 19 games after the All-Star break, he had almost as many free throw attempts as he did in, 51 games before that. He was significantly more aggressive. Now being asked to take on a larger role, he's shot much better from three, whether that was something that clicked or whether that was just part of, Billy Donovan's offense where he finally felt like, oh, I've really got to start, pushing transition and, pull up transition threes, those kinds of things. It definitely seemed to work for him over the final 2-3 months of the season. And whether that's able to be translated to the entire 2025-2026 season, I think that's going to be fascinating to watch.
Yeah, and I would agree. And it's kind of a big reason. Again, I mean, the entire reason the contract and the Giddey saga was so interesting. He was obviously a polarizing player because, as you said, when he played with Zach LaVine at the beginning of the season, I think you touched on it. He was averaging, I think, like you said, 12 points a game pre All-Star break. Another thing is, I believe I had it, he was shooting 34% on threes pre All-Star break. And that's an interesting number because, again, Zach LaVine, for all of his flaws, isn't some bad offensive player. It's the only thing he does. He's great at offense. So you would think playing with and off of a player like LaVine and Kobe White and these guys, Giddey was taking open threes as well, just as he was later on. So it's interesting that he shot at a 34% clip. And then you go post All-Star break, he shot over 45% from three. It's an insane rate, obviously not sustainable for him. But it's interesting because, again, Giddey's not an off the dribble shooter. It's something I hope he would add to his game. But Giddey right now is just a stationary catch and shoot guy, which is fine because no one thought he could do even that. But when you combine his two halves, overall in the year, Giddey shot 37% from three, which is amazing for him and what I expected. And I think anyone expected for him coming into the season on the Bulls. So if he can keep hitting his catch and shoot threes, just being a big guy who can get you a lot of boards, and keep the ball moving and make a catch and shoot three, he could easily have a role as an elite role type player who fits with a lot of different styles. The issue is Giddey has shown he needs to be an engine of the offense to sort of be effective. And that's where the LaVine thing comes in. Pre All-Star break, he seemed like an awkward role player that doesn't work. And then post All-Star break, he's this triple double machine, where I believe against the Lakers, he had like a 15, 10, 17 triple double with 8 steals, something that had never been done before. I mean, the stats were just ridiculous. And the 8 steals is something I wanted to touch on because Giddey, while not a good defender by any measure, he did average a career high 1.2 steals per game with the Bulls. So he was just showing effort. It's something he talked about a lot during the season. And Billy Donovan early on was starting to try to bench him in fourth quarters and closing games because his defense was so bad. And maybe it was through necessity, but I think it was also through Giddey's defense that you saw Donovan stop doing that and started relying on Giddey down the stretch because he said, hey, I know you're not a great defender. You don't have great lateral quickness, but defense is overrated in the technical sense where it's really mostly about effort and trying and not giving up on a play. So the fact that Giddey started to do that on defense, I think was quite encouraging and something he can build on, even if the 3-point shooting is to fall off a bit. And then you also touched on the free throws. Giddey, I think, had a career high 3 free throws per game this year. I would have to double check that. But post All-Star break, as with everything else, he was a lot better. He was getting to the line more, really using his 6'8" frame to shield off defenders and get to the rim and absorb contact. I think it comes from the fact that he comes from the NBL, an Australian league player. It's not officiated and played like in the U.S. where foul baiting is something that's focused on as much. But I think Giddey's starting to understand if you're going to be a point guard who's an offensive engine with high usage in today's NBA, you're going to have to get adept at sort of throwing yourself at the rim, for lack of a better term, and absorbing contact to get to the line, especially if you're a guy who doesn't create jump shots off the dribble. So I think although you could easily wipe away a lot of what Giddey did post All-Star break and say smoke and mirrors, playing a lot of tanking teams, I think you have to dig deeper into how he did what he did. And there's no reason coming into this season Giddey can't continue to shoot well on open catch and shoot threes, continue to get to the free throw line by driving hard, and play hard on defense. So I think everything he did, he's shown he can build off of. Like you said, it's just a matter of how much he can scale up. And that's why I have the biggest issue with the Bulls going up to $25 million a year, because at 20 mil a year, you are paying him to say, hey, you're the starting point guard with some flaws. We're not building around you. We're building with you. And although it's not that much of a difference, when you go up to 25 million a year, I think you are saying this is a foundational piece of our team. And now your team is building in the image of Giddey, where all the draft picks and free agents coming forward, you have to first check, how does this player fit around Giddey? So I think it's interesting when you mentioned that cap space, even that cap space, you can't really sign a player without thinking first, how do I factor in Giddey's weaknesses with this player's fit? So I don't like the fact that paying him the contract you paid him, I do think constricts your team build quite a bit. And it's going to be a big factor in Kobe White's free agency, because I think this season, unfortunately, kind of a repeat of last season, is as much of anything is about Josh Giddey and Kobe White fitting together as a backcourt and how they look moving forward. Because, you're committing north of, 50, $60 million a year in the backcourt if you're going to sign Kobe to what the reported, contract offers have been. So I think Giddey did a lot of great stuff that he can build off of. But the question is, can he do that and still contribute to winning basketball, or is he just going to fall into the unnecessary, or excuse me, the ill-fated good stats, bad team guy?
Well, we are certainly going to find out because the Eastern Conference this year is probably going to have a lot of bad teams. Not just the bad teams, but a lot of the teams off the top are really suffering from major losses. The Pacers, who won the East last year, will be missing Tyrese Halliburton after he tore his Achilles. The Celtics, who won the title, just 2 years ago, will be missing Jason Tatum after a torn Achilles. The Bucks essentially let Damian Lillard go for nothing. They just cut him outright. He goes back to Portland after having, he tore his Achilles as well. So there's kind of this big vacuum, this big power vacuum at the top of the Eastern Conference. I think we expect the Cavaliers and the Knicks to be up there. But moving on a little bit into what we can expect from the Bulls this season, behind the Cavs and the Knicks, it could honestly be a free for all. So I ask you, what is the best case scenario for the Bulls this season?
So the best case scenario for the Bulls this season is you see them capture a I mean, I might as well say the best case scenario for the Bulls is you see them capture the 6th seed in the East. I wanted to say top 6 seed, but there wasn't even a point in going that high because they wouldn't finish higher than 6th, I don't think, even in a best case scenario. But I think that's the Bulls' best case scenario because that is what the Detroit Pistons did last season. And that's what you're looking at. You're looking at a team that was, not good for a long time, middling for some time. And then after one of your players takes a big leap, now you guys are all starting to roll. You're starting to win. You lock into an actual playoff, not play in spot. And you get your young guys some guaranteed playoff experience because that's the biggest issue, I would say, with the Bulls is these play-in games aren't helping your development a lot. And that's why I'm not a big fan of the plan in the first place. I almost wish the plan was a 3-game series. You don't really get your players playoff experience. It's almost just like a high stakes regular season game because the one-off nature of a game can be extremely random. Shooting variants, all type of things can sort of turn a one-game scenario topsy-turvy. So I think it's just going to be interesting to see this year. Their best case scenario would definitely be grabbing that 6th seed because even with the injuries in the East, if the Bulls were to finish with a 6th seed, that means someone on the Chicago Bulls had a great season or took a legitimate leap to have improvement that made them actually a decent team by all intents and purposes. So 6th seed would definitely be a best case scenario. And then again, you're talking about playoff playoff basketball at the UC, which the ownership would be extremely pleased about. So it would be a win-win all around.
Certainly. I am actually going to go way higher than you on this one. I'm going to say
Mm,
best case scenario is the 4 seed. And I'm not going
mhm.
to say it's because of anything in particular that the Bulls have done, but it's more of a question of what is everybody else going to done? Or, that was what is everybody else going to do? I think when you look at the teams in the East, you have the Cavs and the Knicks. Basically, return everybody. Those should be your top 2 teams. After that, there's a lot of rising stars teams, a lot of teams that we really expect to take a leap. That being the Pistons, that being the Magic, and that being the Atlanta Hawks. I think
Yeah.
for me, those are my 3, 4, 5 teams. Those are my prediction teams. But as we know all too well, anything can happen in an NBA season. Anybody can get injured. Players can take a step back. Maybe in Detroit, the Jaden Ivey and Cade Cunningham duo doesn't quite work out,
Mm.
and they're still trying to figure things out. Maybe Asar isn't coming along quite as well on the offensive end. Maybe for the Magic, they have been I believe, I heard this on the Zach Lowe show yesterday. I want to say a bottom 10 offense in terms of net
Yeah.
rating for the last 12 years, which sounds made up. It sounds made up. But if I'm
Seems impossible.
it seems impossible. Apologies to Zach Lowe if I'm, misstating that. But they were bottom 10 in some offensive stat that I'm pretty sure was offensive rating for the last 12 years, which is, it might have been points per possession. That's what it was. So it was offensive points per possession for the last 12 years, which is just unreal. And of course, they bring in Desmond Bain, they bring in, Tyus Jones. Those are both players that should contribute to that a lot. But at the same time, they're still trying to figure out if the Franz and Paolo thing works. And I expect that they're going to take a big leap this season. We just don't know. The Atlanta Hawks, probably the hottest rising team this offseason after so many
Oh
big
yeah.
additions. Nikhil Alexander-Walker comes in one of my most underrated moves of the offseason. Kristaps Porzingis comes over in a trade. They get a lot of different role players in the mix. Trae Young is still phenomenal, just hasn't been getting the respect. But at the same time, you never know. And when you look at the Bulls, it's basically the same roster as the back half of last season, in which it was really good. And they certainly could be primed to capitalize off of this chaos. I mean, when you look at the other teams in there as well, I mean, Celtics still have Jaylen Brown, obviously. They got Anthony Simons, but the depth, especially in the front court, is not looking great after losing
No.
Porzingis and Horford, who I think we presumably assume is going to go to the Warriors once the Kuminga situation is done. And their bench is really thin. As far as the Pacers, that's still a really talented team. They obviously made the finals last year, but their engine is gone. And Tyrese Halliburton, it completely runs through him. So, I mean, Pascal Siakam's still great. Andrew Nemhard's poised to take on a bigger role. Definitely could see some big seasons out of Benedict Mathurin as well, but we just don't know. And with the Bucks as well, you can never count out a team that has Giannis on it. But as a Wizards fan who had to watch a lot of Kyle Kuzma over the last couple of years and watched a decent amount once he got to the Bucks, it's not great. And I don't feel great about the Bucks' chances this season, even in a weak West. Or even in a weak Eastern Conference. So sitting specifically in a best case scenario, sure, the Josh Giddey and Kobe White pairing works great together. Vooch is able to put up another consistent 18 and 10 or something like that. Maybe add on a couple assists as well. And a lot of the role players are able to fill in too. Maybe Modest Buzelis takes a big leap in his second year. We saw a lot of promising things out of him last year. And so, do I think that they're going to get the fourth seed? No. I think I would be pretty foolish to say that. But in a best case scenario, it's not difficult to convince me that that is something that could happen.
Yeah, I mean, it wouldn't, like you said, be extremely far-fetched, like you said, in a best case where everything went right. It's hard for me to see, but when you mention injuries and everything and you say best case, I can definitely see it because as you have sort of touched on, Pacers have the same problem as the Boston Celtics. I believe their starting center right now projects to maybe be Jay Huff. And outside
Hey,
of
don't
that, I think
disrespect
you
Jay
got
Huff. Jay Huff, with all of the reverse alley oops, he was a killer last year.
I think behind his exciting play style, you got Bulls legend Tony Bradley might still be around, and I'm not sure. I don't think they have Thomas Bryant anymore, but Isaiah Jackson is a young guy they rely on. So they just have kind of a center rotation that's also sort of random. And like you said with the Celtics, where they got a rookie Amari Williams from Kentucky who might factor in along with Luka Garza. So it's just not a strong center rotation. And you look at the Bulls against, like you said, some of these Eastern Conference teams having Vucevic and Zach Collins and Jalen Smith, funny enough, puts them in kind of a decent spot in terms of a front court when you look at the bottom rung of Eastern Conference teams, at least. So,
Right. And so now switching gears to the complete other side, because there could be a lot that goes wrong here. What if all of those teams that I just mentioned, all of the Pacers, Bucks, Celtics, turns out they're fine without their stars? All of the Hawks, Magic,
yeah.
Pistons, they take major leaps. The Miami Heat, somehow we always think they're going to be bad, and yet they just end up gritting it out. Maybe it's because they put the slogan on the court. It reminded their players of that every time. Joel Embiid is still on the 76ers. Paul George is certainly aging, but Tyrese Maxey is phenomenal. Maybe that pairing stays healthy. They get VJ Edgecombe as well. Toronto Raptors are a team that is rising, potentially. Brandon Ingram didn't really play much for them last year. Scotty Barnes now comes back. He's, I think, only 22, maybe 23. There's certainly a lot of teams that could make a rise. And if the Bulls can't capitalize on that, I think there's absolutely a scenario where the Bulls could find themselves as the 12 seed. In your opinion, how likely do you think that kind of bottom tier, like worst case scenario outcome is for a team like Chicago, especially in a year as unpredictable as this?
Well, I would say first, if anyone follows me on Twitter, it's Zen Master Mike Gavin. This is my exact wheelhouse, Bulls worst case scenario. So I would say, the worst case scenario for me wouldn't actually even be that. The worst case scenario, and I think you might have even touched on this at the beginning, would be kind of just repeating what you did last season. And to add even more to that, the worst case scenario is Matas Buzelis appearing to be a intriguing role player, because that's not the development path for him. What you want to start to see in that year two is Buzelis have a lot of games where you're like, okay, this is the guy who maybe is the engine for the Bulls. And now I see the vision. Josh Giddey, Kobe White, whoever else is retained is feeding Matas Buzelis. Buzelis is doing pick and rolls, isolation possessions, post ups, catch and shoots, and everyone is sort of working off of Matas in a Jason Tatum type role, where obviously Matas isn't going to be Jason Tatum probably, but he has intriguing ball handling and flexibility for a guy with his height. So maybe Matas is, actually handling the ball more in the half court, and he's running pick and roll with Giddey and Kobe White spotting up around him. So I think the worst case scenario is you don't see Matas Buzelis take any sort of a tangible leap forward, and then the Bulls repeat as a play-in team, which I think I predicted their record to be 38-44 next season. So literally
That
one
makes
game,
sense.
one game worse than last season, and that's the worst case scenario, because whether you're playing or not, which let's just assume they are a 9 or 10 seed again, you're likely getting a low lottery pick unless you get extremely lucky, and you're pretty much adding again another 11, 12 pick into a similar situation, hoping, hey, maybe this guy who's picked later in the lottery is going to surprise us all and have a huge development curve. Because if the Bulls finished, as you said, as a 12 seed, I know I personally would be almost maybe rejoicing. And a lot of Bulls fans who have been begging the team to sort of blatantly tank for years would be happy that they finally fell into a tank, even if it was on accident. Because again, if the Bulls finished as a low seed, missed the play-in altogether, the fans who hate the Bulls having those type of seasons would be extremely upset until lottery night comes around and the Bulls have a top 5 pick and you feel like they can finally atone for the sins of drafting Patrick Williams, which again, I think he will bounce back. But drafting him at 4, you can see missing on those top 5 picks can set you back a bunch, and not having them all together definitely sets you back. So I think the worst case scenario is the Bulls honestly just having another middling season where they finish in the play-in and don't show that much development from Matas. I didn't even mention the rookie Noah Essengate because I think he's going to take a while and you may not see him a lot anyway. He may have a similar development curve to Matas. But yeah, I think the worst case scenario is just a similar record to last year and all of the players putting up similar numbers, because it just feels kind of like a what did we do this for type situation. But if you hit that worst case, or excuse me, that's the worst case scenario, just being average again. If you hit that scenario where the Bulls are awful in terms of record, I think it actually opens up a lot more scenarios for them in terms of ways to improve the team and things. So I don't think it's the worst case for them if they lose a lot, because then it gives you a clear vision of how do you move forward. And it might even open up dramatic options where, if the Bulls are the worst team in the league heading into the All-Star break and teams are refusing to trade for Nikola Vucevic, the Bulls just might decide to buy him out, which is an extreme move, the type of move they don't usually do. But at that point, you allow Vucevic to maybe try to sign with a playoff team if that's something that's important to him. And you would give Zach Collins a bigger opportunity to show he can be a starting center as he enters unrestricted free agency. So having a bad record, I think, would actually open up a lot more options for the Bulls than being a middling team again. So that's definitely the worst case, in my opinion.
Yeah, I definitely separated it between worst case and most likely. And I had the
Yeah.
most likely as, a 40-42 record, the number 9 seed, a play-in loss. The management decides they want to stay the course. They're not going to tank. We're never going to tank. We need to sell tickets. We need to get to the play-in every year. And I mean, you mentioned it. The Buzelis thing is kind of the one of the biggest defining factors of whether this season is a success or not. Josh Giddey could have a really tough year, and I don't think a lot of people would be surprised by it. I know there's a lot of people that believe in Josh Giddey. There's also a lot of people that could see, hey, yeah, this 20 game sample size where he shot absolutely ridiculously well and nearly averaged a triple double was not canon. And maybe even, going into the next summer, you're like, oh, well, Kobe White was, he put up a bunch of stats, but we didn't really win. So, maybe we can do a sign and trade, get something back. And, Vucevic is going to be 35, so we can just let him go, maybe re-sign, Ayo Dosunmu, who will be a free agent then, those kinds of things. but the Matas Buzelis not having, a potential, uh, a star potential. And right at this point, I honestly have no clue. I have no clue what we are going to see out of him. The whole 2024 draft class is really puzzling to me because it was not really viewed as a star-studded draft, but there's a lot of players who showed a lot of promise in that first year. Buzelis, you don't really think of him as big as he is. You think of him more of as a wing, but he's 6'10". He's 6'10", 209. Uh, Obviously made a lot of highlight reel dunks, still has a ways to go on the defensive end. I'm not going to compare him to Giannis because there's only one Giannis. But I will say that is a very skinny 20-year-old. I believe he turns 21 in October before the season starts. There is a lot of room to grow for him in terms of play style, in terms of his physical, shoulder broadening, putting on muscle, those kinds of things. And I think really at this point in time, until you commit to a rebuild and you can finally bring in some top 5 caliber players in the NBA draft, Matas Buzelis' success is probably the number one priority for the Chicago Bulls. And I think ultimately, you know, while I framed this exercise as a best case, worst case, most likely in terms of wins, I do think that the development of Chicago's youngest players is what determines whether the season is successful or not. Really quick before we wrap up, I just wanted to ask a quick player to watch if you have anyone that is you're looking toward as a breakout, somebody who's facing a critical season, something that you're looking for the Bulls this upcoming season.
Yeah, so I'm gonna cheat and throw two players in here together just because one guy we already talked about. Actually, I might cheat and try to group a couple here, but what I'm gonna say for one, for sure, I at least want to say Matas Buzelis, obviously, just touching on him quickly. I think post All-Star break, again, he played well and started to get regular minutes. He was about 13 points a game, I think 4 or 5 rebounds, over a block a game while shooting 36% from three. That's the type of stuff you're going to need to see from Buzelis, continuing to get a lot of blocks, high level defensive play while stretching his range. Uh, Giddey, I would just like to again touch on quickly because in that play-in loss, he tried to be the engine of the team. It showed the problem with the backcourt with Giddey and Kobe. When a team is prepared for their high octane style, Giddey shot 9 of 21 from the field in that play-in game, and Kobe shot 5 of 20. They both were extremely ineffective, and there was no outs for them because no one else was sort of stepping up. So I think it's going to be important for them to showcase again. They can continue to be real engines, but I feel like Giddey, Kobe, Matas, all those guys are cheating because they were on the team last year. So my actual answer would be Isaac Okoro. We didn't really mention him much, but he was part of the offseason trade for Lonzo Ball. I think this is not a make or break season for Isaac Okoro, but pretty big. In Cleveland, he was kind of a bit role player, very great point of attack defender, but offensively, if you look at his basketball reference page, you would just be astonished at how low his usage is. Even for a guy who you think of as just a catch and shoot 3-and-D guy, he really did not do much at all offensively in Cleveland. So in Chicago, this is a clean slate for him. Even if he's coming off the bench, the Bulls' up-tempo style where they're just running, and gunning shots up is going to give him an opportunity to showcase his offensive skill set if he has one that can be developed further. So Isaac Okoro getting to showcase his skills as a slasher and getting to actually take more three-point shots to showcase if he's an actual shooter and not just like a theoretical one is going to be very big for his career. Because again, a lot of Bulls fans were confused by that trade because it's like, is Isaac Okoro a long-term part of the team now? Or was he just sort of a quick flyer to shore up your point of attack defense for this season? With his age, you would consider that he is a long-term part of the vision. And similar to the Josh Giddey trade, the Bulls didn't receive any other assets with Isaac Okoro. It was just Okoro. So that tells me that the Bulls front office believes in him heavily. And so I'm very interested to see if we see a different version of Isaac Okoro from what we saw with the Cleveland Cavaliers.
He is just 24 years old, and I know we didn't get into really the depth chart projected lineup so far. Hopefully, we can do that either next week or sometime in the
Yeah.
coming weeks. I will make a quick prediction before we wrap up. I do think that Isaac Okoro is going to be in the starting lineup
Mm.
on the season opening game. I just think the amount of defense that he brings, regardless of whether the 3-point shooting can keep up with that, I think it's going to be incredibly valuable to a team that has a backcourt of Josh Giddey and Kobe White, presumptively. Michael, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it and everything that you've helped us do at Roundtable. For those listening, where can they find you? What are you working on coming up?
Yeah, they can find me, like I said, pretty much everything that I'm writing or working on or just running my mouth. You can follow me on Twitter at ZenMasterMike or just search my name, Michael Walton. And yeah, pretty much everything is there, along with Roundtable Sports, where you can obviously find all of our Bulls talk. And yeah, that would be it. So I'm excited for us to meet up again and talk about this great team some more.
Absolutely. Less than 1 month, just a couple weeks away from the preseason starting. Pretty shortly after that, the regular season starting. So excited to have a lot more conversations. And thank you for joining, Michael.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thanks again, Gavin.
That's all for the first ever episode of the Bulls Roundtable podcast. We'll have you covered over the next week and all the way up until the start of the season. The Chicago Bulls open the 2025-26 NBA season at home at the United Center against the Detroit Pistons on October 22nd. We will have you covered with online and written stories at roundtable.io/sports/NBA/Bulls, where you can like, comment, share, even create your own community posts, interact with our stuff with written video and podcast coverage, sharing your own thoughts as well. And we will have you covered with so much more heading up to the start of the season. For Gavin Dorsey, I want to say thank you so much for tuning in and I hope to see you next week.